Hi folks, this is all the fruit, and today I'm gonna be foraging and fruit hunting in the desert of Cabo de Gata near Almeria in Spain. The hottest, well, maybe not the hottest, but the driest and sunniest place in Europe. Maybe with the exception of the deserts on the Russian-Kazakh border, where I've never been. I'm starting out at Cala de los Toros, a little bay with a beach, which I like among many other things, because here you can find tons of beautiful, no, not horse manure, but gemstones, agates that give the area its name, jasper, as well as many other ones. They may not be as precious as rubies or diamonds, but they are plentiful. The little, well, wadi or dry riverbed that leads to Cala de los Toros might not have any visible water, but it's still some sort of an oasis. You can see here reeds, date palms, and even some afforestation efforts with pines in the 20th century have worked out pretty well. It's the only place in the whole area where they have worked. Oh, here I'm seeing a nice big chunk of gem, a lot of jasper and quartz and lots of other things. Very unusual. This has been broken up. Here all the rocks are smooth, so I'm pretty sure that somebody has been collecting gems here. You will find gem prospectors, gold prospectors, and so on around here. The area is also riddled with old mines, and today we are gonna go past the Mirador de la Matista, where you can find amethysts, other types of gemstones, all the way to the gold mines of Rodalquilar, biggest gold mines in the region. Walking through this little oasis, I cannot stress how unusual this vegetation is here for the area. Reed, not giant reed in this case, but normal reed, Phragmites. Then the spiny reed here. Yeah, those are basically the only two native oasis species I can spot here. The date palms have been introduced by the Arabs over 1,000 years ago. Oh, finally a goji berry. Yeah, there are native goji berries here. They also grow in the desert around here, but apparently it's too dry over there. But here, tiny wild fruit. Also, here I'm noticing some moisture. It's early May, so towards the end of the rainy season in the Mediterranean. I mean, Cabo de Gata. Okay, now I'm here in the, well, let's talk about the climate a little bit later, but still, yeah. If I wasn't able to get any water from supermarkets or other sources, this is where I would dig. In a dried up riverbed among reeds, where the soil is moist. Yeah. Also look at that here. Slight moisture on the slopes. Yeah. Good to know that in a pinch we could be able to extract water from this landscape. In the 60s and 70s, the fascist Spanish government hired millions of poor country folk to plant pines and eucalyptus and other things throughout the country. Spain wanted to become a big timber exporter and also to give some work to the starving country folks. yeah, it's funny. It's basically the only time the fascist government cared about those people. Normally, they just let them starve. And here in the area, of course, those projects completely failed, except in such little pockets like this oasis here. You will see how different the countryside is once we exit. Here on the edge are a couple dead pine trees. Originally, they managed to establish in the 20th century. However, the droughts of the 21st century, of the last 20 years, killed a bunch of the more exposed ones. The ones in the little valley in the oasis survived. The ones up here, not so much. A lot of very nice, fragrant little dwarf shrubs here. Lavender, thyme. In more lush places, we can even see sage and rosemary. This is quite a good example what the desert of Cabo de Gata looks like. Unlike the oasis here, the surrounding hills are quite typical. And you might think, a desert? What are the sand dunes? There are sand dunes in Cabo de Gata, but not many. And most deserts are not sand dunes. And not all deserts are completely barren. So when we talk about the climate of this area, it's kind of semi-desert, subtropical, Mediterranean, something on the edge between all those. It's not a full desert. It's more or less frost-free, that's why it's subtropical. It's in the Mediterranean and it resembles other Mediterranean climates in that there is more chance of a rainfall in winter, but it does not have this typical 6-month-long rainy season of the Mediterranean. Part of the vegetation made up of thyme shrubland or thyme steppes here in Spain are called tomillares. They cover thousands of square miles. That's why the Spanish have a special name for them. And yes, this is the thyme, Thymus vulgaris, which is used as a spice. However, we had quite a good winter rain season, and still you can see this doesn't look anything like some thyme in a garden or in some other parts of the Mediterranean. Even towards the end of the rainy season, this one still looks pretty parched. And now let's talk about the droughts of the last 20 years. When I started foraging and gem prospecting and fruit hunting in this area almost 25 years ago, there were still quite a number of cacti and agaves. Oh, here, by the way, an aloe. This is aloe vera. You can use it for food, but more important uses are for cosmetics for your skin. Using it for cosmetics is very easy. You just cut off, well, I'll cut off a tip of one leaf. You don't need fancy cosmetic products. You just cut this off. You check whether a very smelly yellow sap comes out. If the smelly yellow sap comes out, you wait for it to flow out. That can take a couple hours or a day. And then you take the non-smelly, transparent jelly sap and smear it on your skin. It's good against sunburn, it's good against dry, parched skin, it's good against cuts, it's good to support your skin. And as I said, you can also eat those things. I'm not sure if they are native to this area. I've seen 3 other plants in a nearby dried riverbed. Here is another one, so that's a total of 5 I've seen here in this region. It's native to parts of the Mediterranean, but of course, since it has been cultivated for thousands of years, it's a nice ornamental, it's a nice medicine. I guess maybe it was introduced to the area. Beneath the aloe, you see tiny little pellets, and somebody has been digging around here. Wild bunnies, wild rabbits. Those are much smaller than the domesticated form. And yeah, they are native here. Well, they are invasive in Australia, in parts of America, in many parts of Europe. They are native to Spain. Actually, Hispania, the name comes from those bunnies. When the Carthaginians, you know, Hannibal, the elephant guy, when they conquered Spain, at least southern Spain, they saw those animals which resembled animals they knew from their old home, which were not bunnies, and which were called something like Hispa, and said, "Oh, this is the land of those syrinxes, or what were they called in English?" Yeah, but they weren't syrinxes; they were bunnies. And so, yeah, Spain. Their symbol might be the bull. Oh, and this bay is called the Bay of Bulls. But Spain literally means the country of the bunnies. Spain might have been named after the bunnies by the Phoenicians, but the bunnies were not the reason they conquered this country. If you believe the Roman historian, who was it, Strabo or Pliny, I always forget, it was not the rich deposits of gold, silver and copper, not the good agricultural opportunities, not here but in other areas, not the plentiful timber, not the slaves and livestock and anything. Nope, the Carthaginians conquered Spain, according to this Roman historian, for this here, for grass. What did they do with this grass? Did they feed it to their animal? Even a goat or donkey would be hard pressed to chew on this. No, they didn't use this grass for food. Until about 50 years ago, until the 70s, this was basically the most important agricultural commodity, not only in the deserts of Cabo de Gata, but in many areas in southern Spain. Here you can see that the slopes are covered with this yellow grass, with this yellow steppe grass. So most of those areas would be classified as steppes rather than deserts. Here they classify it as a desert because it's much drier and sunnier. Oh, look, some bird of prey is hunting over there. But as I said, it kind of resembles a lot other Mediterranean areas not classified as steppe. There are two types of this grass. One is Stipa tenacissima and the other one is Lygium spartum. Of those two, one is of high quality, one is of low quality. When I say high and low quality, I mean one is really tough, the other one is a little bit less tough. And tough is what you want here. Unfortunately, in the North African empire of the Carthaginians, there was only the less tough grass. So this historian says they conquered Spain to use this super tough grass for handicrafts. Basically, if you look at an old Spanish village house, I would say a third of everything would be made of wood, a third would be made of giant reed, and a third would be made of grass. And the reed and grass will also be employed into the construction of the house. And this was basically the main commodity that was harvested and processed in many areas of southern Spain. Until about the 70s, when Spain became rich, and then later they started to get all the Chinese plastics. So now they are mostly producing tourist things from them. But until just a couple decades ago, this was one of the main resources of the area. Actually, I once had a map of the world with the important resources of each area. And a big throughout southern Spain, there was just a big word, esparto grass. Because in all of the south of Spain, this was considered the most important thing. And after all, yeah, the Carthaginians conquered Spain reportedly because of it. I think I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this. But maybe somebody can find the original citation by this Roman historian and post it. Here we have a bushy palm, the so-called dwarf palm. Down here, we are still kind of in this Oasis riverbed. It's quite tall, over 2 meters tall. On the slopes, they will be mostly much shorter. Very important palm tree. The northernmost of all palm trees in the world, one of the frost hardiest, and the only palm native to the European continent. People will say, yeah, but the Cretan date palm is native to Crete and Anatolia. Anatolia is in Asia and Crete is an island. I mean the European continent. Like many other palms, it produces edible fruits, barely edible fruits, and like many other palms, it produces barely edible hearts of palm. Nowadays nobody eats them, and in older times they were considered famine food. But because the people here were so poor that their main resource was a tough grass, basically they were hungry pretty much all the time. So they were munching on this stuff or cooking with this stuff quite a lot in older times. Nowadays it's protected. I always forget what's this Launea arborescens. It's an asteraceae which can be eaten like dandelions, but it can be eaten when it's a lot fresher than this. This is, of course, yeah, I'm quite surprised, like, yeah, when we go back to the climate, so 25 years ago there were a lot of cacti around here and agaves. They were mostly growing here in the lush lowlands. They wouldn't spread to the dry, parched hills. Yeah. You might say this European desert is not a real desert because it doesn't look like what you think a desert should look like. But even the cacti and agaves were restricted to the lusher oasis-like parts. Then a couple years later, they started to look not very good. They were all shriveled up. At first I thought, maybe, by the way, here another oasis with an old ranch on it and a lot of date palms. I thought maybe frost, and people told me, no frost, mate. We didn't have rain that winter. And Spain experienced a lot of horrible droughts throughout the 21st century. Actually, I talked to farmers who said that they are gonna abandon their farms pretty often, and a lot of farms got abandoned. And this year, actually, when I arrived to the Costa Tropical, the main tropical fruit producing area west of here, also almost frost free like here, but with a lot more water, it was lush and green. There were lush grasses over 1 meter high. I haven't seen this in the Costa Tropical for many years, because usually even in winter and spring it would look like this. It would look like the desert. This year it looked pretty nice, and I thought, okay, maybe when I get to the desert I will also experience some nice desert bloom. If you look around, well, there was sort of a desert bloom very early in spring, but I missed it. But it wasn't very big. And even after the rainy season, after a good rainy season compared to most winters in the last decades, everything still looks dried up and parched. Yeah. Very, very difficult to find forageable stuff here, and even more difficult to find drinkable water. But how did the people survive here? I mean, this area has been settled for thousands of years, and until 40, 50 years ago, this was all an agricultural area. Believe it or not, this was all agriculture. Sometimes you still see large-scale cornfields here. They never harvest the corn. Nowadays they just sow it for European subsidies. You sow 1 hectare of corn, you get a couple €1,000. On good land you might get a couple thousand more euros from selling your corn, but here they just care about a couple €1,000 from the government. But even in areas where there are no cornfields nowadays, you find circular circular paved flat areas looking like UFO landing sites. Actually, people even told me UFOs have landed here. We found the ancient Stone Age UFO airports they built for them. Well, no, they were not for UFOs. Those things are usually 10, 20, 30 meters in diameter, plastered with stones, and they used to thrash the corn there. And actually here, now the light is not so good, but in a perfect light you can see that the shrubs grow kind of in neat rows. Those shrubs were not planted, but they follow old terraces. I don't know what was grown on the terraces on those hills. It's possible also corn. They grow a lot of corn on terraces in Spain. Well, corn, by corn I don't mean maize, but wheat and other things. It's possible they grew olives or or almonds. It's also possible they grew cacti. Here, nowadays they use the cacti for fruits, and they also use them to a small scale to feed goats and other animals, but they planted them basically for the cochineal lice. Their blood is very colorful and you can use it to color fabrics or foods with it. If I see a cactus with cochineal, I'll show you. Here in front of this trailer there is an olive tree. I don't know if it's an old survivor from the old agriculture in the area, because there are also a couple eucalyptus trees here. Couple more here. They were planted along this road, and as you can see, not even 1 in 50 survived. But it's possible that this olive tree was planted together with the eucalyptus trees. Okay, it's not exactly at the road, so it's possible that it's a survivor of an old oasis garden here. Yesterday, over there I made a video where I found the remnants of an ancient oasis garden. And I found it so amazing. I was afraid, well, the drought was of course very bad for the farmers. I thought it would also be very bad for the native wildlife. But actually what suffered most were really the invasive cacti and agave. Even 25 years ago you could see that they struggle a lot with the desert climate, grow only in the best areas with best soil and water supply. Now the cacti, at least the normal prickly pear, is all but gone. Gemstones pretty much everywhere around here. The normal prickly pear is all but gone. The agaves, they cling to life in some areas, but they have been reduced a lot by 20-something years of drought. Okay, now I see that we have 2 olive trees here. So I think that those are the remnants of some oasis agriculture. They were not planted for the roads. They are a little bit too far away from the road. The eucalyptus are next to the road, so I guess, I mean, apparently down there we have some oasis conditions. So I think that this whole area here was agriculture decades ago. I couldn't find any remnants of rubble walls, but it's quite a flat area, so maybe they didn't build any. Here again, some geologists have been active, cracking this rock on top of the bigger rock. Wow. Slope of the road, where the soil is probably a lot more loose. Some stuff grew in earlier moister years, but this year, despite it not being too dry, the grasses struggle here because the soil is too water permeable. On the edges of the road you see a very different situation, because the asphalt is not water permeable. The water runs off here, so those areas left and right of the road get a lot more water. So see, up here the vegetation is quite lush for 1 or 2 meters. Looking back over the Oasis at Cala de los Toros, the little originally fishing village, now tourist village of Isleta del Moro, El Fraile. The mountain in the background is the highest hill in the area, and the lowlands around it are quite a nice oasis-like condition. That's why there are a lot of big farms there, and maybe someday I'll show you some remnants of desert agriculture there. However, now we are heading to the gold mines. Here the eucalyptus, some of them have been planted a little bit further away from the road, so it's not impossible that the olives have also been planted, but it wasn't so typical for those times to plant olives. They planted this stupid eucalyptus, which dries out the soil. And they planted stupid pines, which also dry up the soil. And what is this big bush down there? I'm very lazy, but also very curious. It even seems to be flowering. Okay, I can't resist. I have to go and check it out. Further back, there is a young date palm, and behind it, another shrub. Oh, all of them right in the gully. Oh, okay. This thing is not so much flowering as losing its leaves. That's how bad it is even in a more or less moist year. And this is very well adapted to drought. This is a carob, a young carob tree. They like olives and date palms. Oh, and look at this huge gemstone here. Jasper is not a very expensive gemstone, but it's still a gemstone. And here there are lots of big chunks. Well, carob, imported from the Eastern Mediterranean, very imported fruit tree. The fruits dry on the tree. There are big beans that dry on the tree. Let's find one. Well, the beans are not so big. The tree can grow quite big. Here is a rotten one on the ground. It didn't even manage to develop quite well. They are kind of sweet and full of sugar, so you can eat them out of hand when they are not rotten. You can make them into flour and make this into some sort of cocoa-like drink. And also the seeds, which some rat has eaten out of this here. The seeds traditionally were used to weight gold and gemstones. That's where the word carrot comes from. Carrot and carob is the same name. Carrot comes from the name of this plant. And nowadays the seeds are even more valuable, because they use them to congeal different things, different foods. They are used as a sort of vegan gelatin, much more valuable than the fruit nowadays. Here you can see that the moistish winter hasn't been fully without consequences. Two little carob seedlings, they are not gonna survive. Firstly, it's too dry here, and secondly, it's too shady under the tree. They are not gonna survive. Also some aloes established here and here. Maybe originally the tree did some protection for the aloes, and here in the river, well, in the dry gully, which was reinforced by a couple rubble walls to stop erosion, they probably grew quite well, but now you can see the part that's under the tree has dried up. Same with the aloes on this side. The part under the tree has dried up. Yeah, strange. I really wonder whether they are native here or not. A lot of green stuff. I wonder if this could be green copper mineralization. I mean, copper is often found together with gold. However, here the gold is mostly found in lead and silver deposits, but yeah, there were also copper mines here in the area. Another very interesting industry that was very active around here in the 60s, 70s and 80s was movie making. There are still quite a lot of movies being made here, but usually just single scenes, because there are a lot of crazy landscapes here. Some of them I might show you in other videos. However, back then, whole movies were made here. Usually Western movies. For example, half of the Italian movie industry would move here in winter. The Mediterranean winter is very rainy, so filming outdoors, look at the beautiful gems. So filming outdoors was not really an option in Italy. So they would come here and they would shoot dozens of Western movies in the deserts. Not so much in the desert of Cabo de Gata, more in the nearby desert of Tabernas. However, Cabo de Gata also had its fair share of movies. Star Wars, Indiana Jones, so many other famous movies. Parts of them were shot around here. Look at that, incredible! A young carob tree is established here where a lot of water accumulates. All the water from the road here, but also all the water from the road up there basically goes there. They even made a little ditch for the water. It's amazing. I think the runoff from the road is the only reason this young carob tree or shrub established here. That's so amazing. Mirador de la Matista. Some people are really trying hard to make sense of the name, translating it as outlook or viewpoint of the lovers. It's pretty much similar to what they do to the name of the whole region, Cabo de Gata. They say, oh, this is the promontory of the female cat, or there is Gata is some old Arab word which means cap, so which means promontory, so it's the promontory of the promontory. No man, Cabo de Gata is the promontory of the agates, because you can find and mine agates here. It's so simple. It's called the promontory of the agates, and agates are lying around everywhere, gemstones. Same thing with this Mirador de Amatista. Down here I have found quite nice big amethyst crystals. It's called Mirador de la Amatista because you can find and mine amethysts here. A lot of the mustards that grow here you can eat. This is if you like hot and spicy tastes. In winter, shortly after the rains, they might be juicy and tasty, but now not so much. Same goes for the asparagus here. There are a lot of asparagus species here, but unlike in Italy, I haven't heard of there being a tradition of foraging asparagus here. A lot of the wild asparagus species are quite bitter, and even asparagus species which are tasty in Italy, I think it was asparagus albus. In Malta nobody is foraging it, and I once collected a lot of it because nobody was foraging it and it was bitter. So maybe somebody can tell me, is the asparagus around here bitter, or did they maybe forage it in older times? Wow, another carob tree. I wonder why it got established here on the edge. Must have been the runoff from the road. There is no other logical explanation why it would survive here. Look up here. Another water-rich place. Giant reed growing here. Giant reed normally gets 7 meters tall. This here is barely 2 meters, but the fact that it grows here shows that there is underground water. Maybe not much, maybe pretty deep, but there is something. We can see the gold mining town of Rodalquilar in the distance. I'm really surprised how many of those eucalyptuses survived along this road. Also, I can see some of this useless agriculture here. When you look at the slopes, you see old terraces. And this structure up there, well, could have been a farmhouse, but I don't believe it. Maybe could have been some water reservoir, but it's a little bit too high on the mountain for that. But here, all those slopes were farmed, probably for grains, as well as the lowlands here. And parts of the lowlands are still being farmed, but I don't see any sense in this. However, around here, I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for wild watermelons. Yeah, there are wild watermelons in this desert. Because watermelons are desert plants. Yeah, you didn't know that, did you? And this is the first place in the world where I've ever found wild watermelons. The most bitter thing I've ever eaten. They were so horrible. They are not even native to Spain. They were introduced probably by the Arabs who used them as medicine. But yeah, around here, actually a couple days ago I found the plant and filmed it. Here I hope to find more. There in the distance, another olive has survived, and next to it I think it's a wild Sisyphus lotus, a relative of the jujube. Well, Sisyphus basically means jujube. It's not Sisyphus jujube, the Chinese date, but this is a species native to the Mediterranean, Sisyphus lotus. Yeah, observe, no cacti in this desert. It's very unusual not to find cacti in the coastal areas of the Mediterranean. And I assure you, they were here 25 years ago. They are all gone. Okay, one source of food, maybe the biggest source of food for me in this desert, gone. But I'm still happy because they're invasive. And here, 1, 2, 3 more olive trees behind those eucalyptus. The olive trees might not look like much, but I'm pretty sure they are remnants of the ancient agriculture here. They might be well over 100 years old. Much older than the eucalyptus. Wow, amazing. 2 mulberry trees here in the middle of the desert. The fruits are black, but despite the fruits being black, wait, let me not say anything wrong because those things... okay, finally, food. Let's put down the backpacks. Trekking through a cold desert can be quite difficult. You need to carry a lot of water and you have to carry a lot of clothes and sleeping bags and stuff. No, fruit-wise, definitely tasty. White mulberry. This was introduced here centuries ago, not for the fruits, but for the leaves. And while humans and livestock can eat the leaves are mostly used to feed silkworms. And the silkworms were then used to produce silk. You know, those expensive, valuable clothes. Of course, you could eat the fruits. However, the trees were very rarely selected for good fruit quality. They were selected for being able to survive without any care and being able to produce lots of leaves. But still, the fruits are of good quality.